Go to this. This meeting's being recorded, that's fine. Continue. And there we are. All right. Now today we're basically focused on various aspects of extinction and what happens when this or that species are extinguished, and what happens to the things left behind. So the focus is both directions. It's not only what's going to be gone, but also what is the relationship of that to the other things which are still in the system. Now this story could start a long time ago, but I don't have that kind of background. My slim knowledge of this area starts 65 million years ago when North America looked like this isolated island up here, and South America was an isolated island down here 65 million years ago. And the Pacific Ocean went right on through here over to the Atlantic. And this was the bullseye. This was where the bomb hit. What the bomb looked like was this. It was an enormous meteor, and it hit with enormous impact. The crater looks like this. This is the tip of the Yucatan Peninsula. Now this crater is now buried underneath sediment, so you can't see it straight out, but we're talking 20 or 30 kilometers deep. So I got a deep hole in the Earth's crust. And when that meteor hit, it created well, the little physical things it created right away was an enormous amount of trash thrown into the atmosphere, dust and rock and dirt, which made what we call a nuclear winter around the globe for at least several years, meaning that the sunlight was blocked as a consequence of this, effectively turning the world into night for several years. The second thing has happened in that a lot of the material that was in this hole, excuse me, was liquefied as basically liquid glass, and the liquid glass splashed all the way to Canada. So here we are at the tip of the Yucatan Peninsula, and the impact was so great that the material itself splashed all the way to Canada. The third thing that was conspicuous was, at the instant, is it created a tidal wave that was supposed to be 3 kilometers high, an enormous wall of water that went around the Earth 2 or 3 times. So everything got impacted. All the land, all the ocean. The only thing that seems to have escaped a bit is Antarctica. So some things on Antarctica seem to have survived this event, but the impact was enormous. And so I can say happily or safely that you are here today because that meteor hit. Because what that meteor did was take the dinosaurs off the surface of the Earth. And you would never have evolved into a big, soft, easy to eat mammal in the presence of dinosaurs. Okay. So without this meteor hitting, we would not have this radiation of an enormous number of species of big mammals, and of course other things as well. But the whole point being that this took a major life form off the Earth's surface. I cannot speak to the ocean, except that I do know from paleo friends that a lot of big things in the ocean were extinguished at the same time. Probably due to breakdown of the food chains in the ocean, because if you turn everything into night for years, the photosynthetic algae in the ocean don't photosynthesize. So the source of resources to the ocean drops which means you don't have little things. If you don't have little things, you don't have bigger ones to eat them. And if you don't have bigger ones to eat them, you don't have great big ones to eat them. So basically the ocean starved. Undoubtedly, the mainland, the lands, the terrestrial surfaces starved as well as a consequence of the plants basically not being able to photosynthesize. So basically, who survived this event would be things that could eat detritus, carrion, things like seeds that are not that are dormant and therefore don't rot immediately. Anything that has a long biological lifetime would be food for a small number of things, insects, maybe small rodents. And out of this, a few small dinosaurs survived, and you're what you call birds. But today's are the birds are basically the remaining survivors of the dinosaur community. So now we jump forward to now. And we walk out into Central America, and you see a tree like this. It's all over the countryside, called Crescentia. And underneath it are all these fruits. And you ask, you know, what's the connection between that and what the story I've just told you? Well, the connection is that when you see a lot of food lying around, not being used and eaten by anybody, it may get you think somebody is missing. Somebody got extinguished. So this is what the tree looks like. These fruits are about the size of a grapefruit. They fall on the ground, as you can see them down here. And they just sit there. And biologists for 100 years have argued about what disperses the seeds of this tree. Because everybody sees this tree, sees the fruits on the ground, just rotting. What they look like, they land on the ground when they're green, they gradually turn brown, they seem rotten, and they eventually decompose. And so lots of discussions about what is going on. This is in wild communities now. This is not talking necessarily about your neighbor's backyard. And you could break open the fruit. It's not very tasty inside. When it falls on the ground, it's got this white pulpy stuff in the middle. It's kind of bitter tasting. Bunch of little tiny seeds like cantaloupe seeds inside. And it just, opening up the fruit doesn't give you any more clue as to what's going on. And if you go out there and you jump up and down on one of them, these are hard as stones here, these green things. They gradually begin to turn brown. As they get down like this, they become more fragile. So now you can jump up and down on one and it ends up looking like this, smashed. But you can just see it's just all rotten inside. So your reaction is, well, it's just rotted, so what? That doesn't help us with anything. Now, people now and then saw a squirrel, as right here, just like the squirrels you know in Philadelphia, with one of these fruits, chewing a hole in it, and arguing then that therefore the squirrel is sloppy, and some of the seeds from this sloppiness fall on the ground and grow into seedlings, and pretty soon you have another tree. And so that would be the argument that, well, the squirrel is what's missing, all right? But that wasn't very satisfying, firstly, because there were a lot of these fruit trees, a lot of the fruits, and just the occasional squirrel here or there, and you saw very little evidence of this kind of feeding damage. The botanists, this was the mammal people. The botanists, the plant people, tended to argue for floating. See, this is flooding at the beginning of the rainy season, and you see the one there, and another one here, another one there, and there's one over here. They're just disappearing, being carried around by the water, and the argument was, well, they rot open, and then the seeds germinate, and from that you get new trees, all right? Well, neither of these things seemed satisfying to me, but I had no answer to go with this at all, except that these trees are right in front of our house. They're everywhere. So it was a very obvious, puzzling question. Here we are again, the fruits underneath the tree. Now, I was standing, I don't know, perhaps 50 meters away from this particular individual tree. on a road, a dirt road, and in the dirt road was a pile of horse shit, dung from a horse. And I looked down at it, and right there in the dung was a little tiny seed, like a cantaloupe seed, a muskmelon seed, and but I didn't recognize it, and I stooped down, picked the seed up, held it over my shoulder to my Costa Rican assistant who was working with me in the field, and I said, "Gerardo, what do you think this seed is?" He says, "Oh, that's jicaro." Now, jicaro is the common name for this tree. Placentia is the formal name. And I said, no, Gerardo, it can't be jicaro because a horse in no way could eat these grapefruit-sized rock-hard fruits. He said, yeah, that's what they do. They eat them. And I was certain that he was wrong. So I walked over here, picked up one of these fruits, walked over to the horse pasture, and held it out to the horse. And in the process, I noticed this. You see, here's a fragmented one, but the rotten material in the center is gone. None here, none here, none in the side of this thing. And look what happened when I held it over the fence to the horse. The horse took it in its mouth, and you could see the muscles right here on the side of the face, straining and bulging, and bang, the fruit broke. The horse dropped it to the ground, stuck his long tongue inside, scooped out the rotten material, and swallowed it. I thought, wow. Well, wait a minute, that can't answer the problem because this is an introduced animal. That was my reaction. Everybody knows horses came back with the Spaniards, right? So that was an amazing event, but it still didn't, in my mind, solve the puzzle. So then whenever I stuck my finger in the gooey black stuff inside of one of these fruits, and it was pure molasses, just pure sugar. All that white stuff in the center of the green fruit, when it falls to the ground, had been converted to sugar. So these things, all of a sudden I realized, whoa, that is why they fall off the tree while they're still green. It's to present the fruit to a ground-based dispersal agent. And who's the ground-based dispersal agent? Well, a horse, except the Spaniards brought the horse. And then I remembered what I had learned from the Smithsonian Institution long ago, that the horse evolved here. The horse did not evolve in the old world. The horse evolved here. There were horses all the way up to 9,000 years ago, native horses. We extinguished them. But in the meantime, they went across the Bering Straits into Europe, and you call them zebras, Kozłowski's horses, burros, quaggas, and proper, ordinary, regular horses. So the Spaniards brought back something from extinction, but it's not treated that way. But it's as though you would found a giant ground sloth in Europe and decided to bring it back to the New World. Okay. So look at the horse dung itself. So here's the horse dung in a pasture, and right there is a seedling of the Crescentia seed tree. That is how it's dispersed. So what happens is the horse walks into the forest, into the edge of the forest, eats the fruit, walks out in the grass to eat grass, and defecates out there. And the seedling then has full sun to grow up and become a happy big tree. So immediately this became an experimental animal for us. Whereas the horse had been ignored by all the kinds of field ecologists. Nobody wanted to deal with horses. They were introduced. So I took the black material out of the center of one of these ripe fruits. And these are buttons brought down on South Street in Philadelphia of different sizes and weights, and put the buttons in the fruit like seeds, and then gave those to the horse. and then monitored how long it took the seed to go through the horse. And did the seed make it through, and did it not make it through? So this became an experimental animal now to look at gut passage and seed transmission and seed dispersal, which was possible because horses are friendly, because you can get near them, you can collect their dung, and you can feed them things. You can't do that with a lot of wild animals that you'd like to ask the same kind of question. Because at that time, the argument was that dispersal agents who swallow things and then defecate them somewhere are treating the outside of the seed to germinate it. Well, I was very puzzled by this, and I took the seeds themselves out of the fruit and just washed them and put them out and discovered they germinate perfectly well. They do not need the horse at all. What the horse is doing is moving the seed from that hard fruit into an open, sunny place, because sun is what that tree has to have to grow up. And in fact, this is the horse we had. This photograph is a photograph of a sign at the La Brea tar pits in the suburbs of Los Angeles. If you ever get stuck in Los Angeles for a half a day, take a taxi or a bus to the La Brea tar pits, where these animals got stuck and literally preserved in the tar. So they were quite literally pickled in the tar by falling in or getting stuck in the pit of tar, of liquid tar, just like in liquid tar and asphalt on a road. And now they're being carved out of that. And so we know exactly what they looked like, what color they were, what the hair was, what they had in their stomachs, everything. Now, when you remove these horses, what happens? In other words, we extinguished them back then, 9,000 years ago. We'll get to that in a minute. We extinguished them. What's the ripple effect in the community? Well, these are the flowers of the Crescenia tree. So if you take the dispersal agent out of the system, these flowers are not there. And those flowers are pollinated by bats. It's a major food item for bats and for a group of moths. And here's the bat. You see, this is not an insect-eating bat, the kind that you're used to. This is one with a long tongue that's furry on the end. So it goes up to that flower, grabs the flower, sticks its head inside, and slurps up the nectar that's inside. So it's a bat-pollinated flower. Well, if you take that tree out of the system, this bat doesn't have food at that particular time. And that particular time is 13 days after the first rainstorm. When the rainstorms come on, 13 days afterwards, the Crescenia tree flowers for a few days. So now suddenly the bats are going to do something different during that time, or they're going to starve. They either have to move, leave, or have some alternative host. So now you get the first ripple. But this is another flower that's pollinated by that bat at night. So if you remove the bats that pollinate Crescenia, then you remove the pollinator for this plant at the same time. So that's another ripple in the system. And that means this one doesn't make its fruits. And if it doesn't make its fruits, the beetle who eats the seeds of those fruits doesn't have its food 6 months from now. So you can see these ripples are not only from species to species, but at various intervals across time as well. Now the horses, of course, were not only dealing with Crescenia fruits. They eat grass, yes, but here they are on the edge of the forest, as you can see with their heads down. And one of the beautiful things about horses is that, as I said before, you can walk right up to them. You can count what they're doing. You can see what they're doing. So what these guys are doing is picking up fruits off the ground underneath this tree. And what the fruits look like, Winnie has just brought me a Crescenia flower. Let's see, I'm not sure you can see it, but
back off a bit.
There it is, yeah. There's the open flower, and if I turn it sideways, this is what it looks like sideways. And this is from the tree right in front of our house at the present time. And so that's what the Crescentia flower looks like. So what are these guys doing? What are these horses doing? They're eating these fruits fallen from the tree above. They're in Guazuma, and one horse can eat 2,501 meals. Because I stood there right in front of his nose with my hand counter, counting them as he picked them up. So the point is, it's a big experimental mammal now. It's not a little mouse in a cage in the basement of Leidy. Okay, this is a free-ranging animal, and you get a chance to watch what it actually really does close up and its reaction. So it'll eat 2,500 fruits, literally, and fill up on grass. So again, it's shitting its seeds out there in the grass, in the sun, because this tree, Guazuma, also has to have sun to germinate and grow. So here's what the fruits look like. This thing is very hard, crunchy, not soft and juicy or anything like that. And the black layer that you see around the outside that looks horrible is in fact molasses. The same kind of stuff that was inside the Crescentia fruit. So here, what we see, here's the green one over here. These are developing ones here as they grow. Okay. But here's the mature one that falls on the ground, again, presented to a ground-based dispersal agent. Now, you all know what an apple core is. What's the core for in an apple? Is to protect the seeds. Okay. Now, the sweet part of an apple is to get you to eat the fruit and either swallow the seeds or discard the core. Right? That's what's going on with the apple. Well, the same thing's going on here. Now, in this particular case, you can see that this is a cross section, and you can see the seeds in their little columns inside. Or here's a longitudinal section, and there's the seeds there. And right in the middle is this piece, and that is hard as stone. And notice the diameter of that piece. It's from about there to there, which is the size of one of these seeds. These seeds are soft. And if this was not there, the horse could grind up, it would grind up these seeds as nutrients. But the core blocks the molars from shutting so that it can't chew up the seeds. So the seeds then go through the horse. So the whole point is that this fruit is evolved with a horse or a horse-like animal as part of its partner. Now, the horse goes extinct, somebody else could pick it up. And in this case, we don't have anybody else who picks it up. But the whole point is there could be somebody else, some other big animal who does the same thing. But the point is this thing right here is what blocks the horse's molars from including. You can see it here in the center again. That's the rock hard piece right there. Here it is dissected away. So here's the core. And here are the seeds. So this is what blocks the molars. And if there are no horses at all, the seeds can germinate inside the fruit, run their roots out this way, and put the plant up there like this, if it's got the sunlight to do it. But normally it would not. Okay. But there were other things besides the horses. These are the giant ground sloths. And these are models that came out of the tar pit. This is the Brea tar pits that I mentioned before. And underneath this fur were hard plates, which presumably were protection against predators. And these guys are all vegetarians. And they shuffle along on the ground. And we call them giant ground sloths because they're closely related to the tree sloth that lives up in trees. But we don't have any of these anymore anywhere on the globe today. But they were other kinds of megafauna. And this is a Gomphothere. This is a mock-up made by the BBC for a movie we did. And this is what one of those sloths looked like very close up in detail. just as it comes out of the liquid tar. This is another species. It was 5 meters tall at the shoulders. Now think about that. 5 meters, that's 2 stories on a building. And these were huge animals, and they were out there tearing up trees, eating vegetation like a bulldozer. So the idea, of course, is that the thing you call an intact forest today, when you walk out in Pennsylvania or in the southern United States or in the tropics somewhere, is not really an intact forest in the sense that up until 6,000 years ago, it had these kinds of animals as part of the disturbance, the normal disturbance of that forest. And there is still fossil dung, shit, from these things in caves in Argentina. So not only that they get them out of the animals out of the tar pits, but they also can do the DNA analyses of that dung to know what they were eating. This is a glyptodon. This was a ground-dwelling animal, weighed about 2 tons. This is a hard, bony shell over its back, but it's a mammal. But here's an armadillo for scale, just to give you some idea of the size of it versus an armadillo. And this guy would eat fruits, seeds, roots, low vegetation, that sort of stuff, and just tromp along and be an herbivore. One more, we had a whole fauna of these things in the New World tropics. We had 5 species of camels here. Now today, the only camels you know of from the New World are the llamas of the vicuñas in South America. But we had 5 other species of camels, big ones, medium-sized ones. Now these happen to be African camels introduced to the southwestern US. You can see they've got a harness on the head here. But the point being, we had all these big animals up here, all of them eating fruits, all of them swallowing seeds, all of them defecating, all of them impacting vegetation. There's a Gomphothere. These things are little elephants that went around in herds of 5 or 6 or 10, that sort of thing. And along with mastodons, which are here, along with mammoths, which are there, all these things are right here in the United States. These were all in the tropics as well. To give you some idea how really big these animals are and were, here's a skeleton directly out of the Brea tar pits. I'll give you some scale. But you say, well, that doesn't look very big, right? Look at the molars right here, these molars right there. They're for crunching up twigs. They're not for grass eating. That's for crunching up woody vegetation. If it was grass eating, it'd be flat like a file with very fine ridges for milling the grass into little tiny pieces. But this is for crunching up big twigs and branches. Now, this is the molar, an actual molar from one of those. Look at the size of that compared to Isidro's hands here. You're talking about big animals now, but they got that bumpy shape, have the same biology that the elephant does today. This animal was probably born with maybe the ability to make 8 teeth in its life. And you see how this one is worn down? This is the front one, and then there's the most front one is this one is wearing down. Eventually this will grind off. As it grinds off, this one comes into play, and another one comes in from behind. And as I said, there's something 6, 7, 8 during its life. And by the end of the 6th or 7th, 8th molar, it dies. That's very different from your molars. And anyway, look at the size of that thing and think of that as what was walking around here in Pennsylvania or in Costa Rica. This particular molar came out of a post hole being dug by a farmer here, and his kids took it to school, and they had an auction and what do we call it? Everybody makes a guess and somebody gets a piece of money because they were correct as to how big was the cow that had this molar. Okay, that was the mindset that was going on at the time that this was found and taken into town, into the school. Of course, if you have the herbivores doing all this stuff, you've got carnivores and vultures going along. I mean, you've got killing carnivores as well as vultures. All over the United States, there was a vulture with a 20-foot wingspread. Think about that now. A vulture that was 20 feet across the wings. And it was all the way from the East Coast to the West Coast. The last ones that were extinguished were on the beaches in California. We don't know exactly when, but the point being that they ran out of food. When the big mammals went down, the vultures didn't have the carcasses anymore. So the last ones survived on dead whales and dead marine things washing up on the beach. And that was their sort of the last food until 9,000 years ago, when the 9,000 years ago event occurred. And that was it. The big saber-toothed cats weighed double what a lion weighs, with the big canines on the front that look like this. These things probably took the kids, the babies and the teenagers of the big herbivores, rather than the adults themselves. So if you want a sloth and you're only twice the size of an African lion, you're going to focus on the children. And it's striking that what we think is that when humans took out the adults, it was these predators who cleaned up the last remnants. In other words, humans took the big guys and kids too, I'm sure. But at the same time, then the starving carnivores like this would have been the ones who would find, hunt down, run down the little ones and stop all the reproduction. Well, who did it? Well, there it is. Now, this is only 3,000 years ago, but the spear points and the arrowheads from 9,000 years ago are unbelievable workmanship. So it's very, very clear that we had people came across from the old world into the new world probably around 20,000 years ago, 20,000, 25,000. But about 9,000 years ago, and my bet is, and many people feel the same way, that for the 20,000 years to the 9 or 10,000 years ago, these people were basically sort of incidental predators. They were sort of one more carnivore in the system. But about 9,000 years ago, a group of hunters who were clearly very, very specialized at killing and moving on and killing. So basically, you remember, you didn't have a freezer or a refrigerator to put the food in when you killed one of those big mammals. You and your village had to live off of it for the 1 or 2 days before it spoiled, and then you had to go after another one. So these people went through and basically eliminated the horses, the ground sloths, the mastodons, the mammoths, a wide variety of the glyptobont would just be lunch for the tribe. That's basically where they went. And these are moderately nicely done spear points, but and these are not for war. These are for basically capturing wild animals. This is a much more modern one. This is only 500 years ago, but this is the kind of tools. That is a bone. This is a bone right here with a groove made on each edge. And the groove, in the groove are fitted little pieces of razor blade. These are obsidian, volcanic glass that are razor sharp when they're placed in the groove. They're glued in the groove. So this makes the edge of the spear. And then as this gets worn down and these get broken off, then they clean those out and put them back, new ones back in, and sort of retool the tool to make it work. And there are fossil mastodons with these things stuck in their rib cage, so that this spear was thrown hard enough so that it went through the ribs of the mastodon, and then that became fossilized. And of course, today The indigenous people in Africa came up with iron. And so, of course, they made their spear points out of iron. But that's basically the same device for the same purposes. Now, when we leave behind our world and we go to Australia, something funny happens. I'm out walking through Australian rainforest, thinking about this world here that I know in Central America. And I suddenly realized that, wow, there's all these weird fruits laying on the ground. Nobody eating them. So I got a plastic bag and I just start collecting them. So this is an hour's worth of collection off the fruit, off the ground. These blue things are the size of a tennis ball. That's as big as a tennis ball is. So this is for an animal who can eat a really big fruit. But there aren't any elephants, there aren't any rhinos, there aren't things like that in Australia now. And then I come upon this. This is a shit from some big animal. That is a seed from the golf ball, from the tennis ball sized fruit, intact, the size of a golf ball. So this animal is defecating seeds as big as golf balls. So that's got to be a big animal. Well, we finally met the animal. It's called a cassowary. Think like an ostrich, except it's not an ostrich. It's the Australian version. And this guy is as tall as I am. So if I was standing next to him, my head would be right about there. And so what he's doing is swallowing, as birds do, swallowing the fruit whole. So he's swallowing entire tennis ball or orange-sized fruits. And the gizzard then strips off the pulp, and the seed goes, this great big seed goes right on through. Now, a mammal wouldn't do that. The mammal would chew up the seed, or it would spit it out. Now, some of these birds, not this one, but they actually can regurgitate seeds that are too big. So it gizzard strips off the fruit, and then the seed is spit back out. Well, this is Australia before. This is 50,000 years ago. See the person here for scale? These are all the marsupials that were in Australia when people got there 50,000 years ago. These are all have pouches, you know, kangaroos. And these are all drawn to size. They all disappeared in about 15,000 years. In other words, humans got there 50,000 years ago, and by 15,000 years ago, by 15,000 years after that, the only thing left was a cassowary and a couple of kangaroos, and then little kangaroos, which you call wallabies and other animals similar to that, but little guys. They were fast, agile, and would be surviving hunters. But these big clumsy things would not survive hunters at all. So here's a representation of the Philadelphia newspaper many years ago of what happened in North America. When the hunters got here, the extinction was very abrupt. A very large number of things dropped out. Australia, very large. But Australia was earlier. See, this is only 10,000 years ago. This is 50,000 years ago. Madagascar, New Zealand is when the Europeans hit. They took out the moas, these huge birds that were all over New Zealand and Madagascar. They took them out. There weren't very many species, and they did the damage very quickly, but this is European impacts. Sorry, I just swallowed a mosquito on my computer. But here they're going into Africa. You see how it goes down gently? That's because these guys were evolving with humans as predators. See, in these cases, the human was a new kind of predator. But up here, humans were being invented starting 6 million years ago, or those kinds of times. And as they gradually became more human and more human and more dangerous, this or that species wasn't able to coexist with them. So you drop them out, one after another, after another, after another, after another. but not in one abrupt drop like this. Okay. Because again, that's co-evolving with the predator. These animals had not evolved, had not co-evolved with humans as a predator. And what really hit me in Africa was, I grew up throwing spears and making my own bows and arrows and things like that. And I could hit a deer-sized animal fairly accurately at about 30 meters with a spear, with one of my spears. As I walked across pieces of Africa during the wars where there were no guards in the park, so we could go anywhere and do anything we wanted to, I discovered that the animals in Africa have an approach distance that matches about how far I can accurately throw a spear, which I thought was very, very interesting. In other words, you start walking up to one of these animals on an open grassy plain where he can see you perfectly well and absolutely aware that you're there. And you can get up to about 20, 25 meters, something like that, from that animal. And all of a sudden, head goes up and he walks off or runs off. It's as though that's programmed into them to view me, the ordinary walking human, as another dangerous animal. This is the moa from New Zealand, because that was recent by Europeans. We have, by Europeans and recent indigenous people, we have remains, actual specimen remains. This is a bird that was huge. It was the size of an ostrich or bigger, and humans took them all out. In northern Mexico, you have these things called nopaleras, which are enormous patches of cactus, of poncha cactus. And the maguey plants like this, which have very heavy spines on the tips of the leaves. But where's the animals that selected for all that? Well, here, if you get up close to the cactus, you can see that the stems, the leafy part of this is really a stem of a cactus plant. The green part of a cactus plant, it's got long spines on it. But the fruits have almost no spines. So this has been evolved to be picked off by a mammal. Mammal with a tender mouth, picked off that and eaten. Now those animals aren't there anymore, but we still have the plants. So this is an anachronism. The fact that the spines are short and these are long, that's an anachronism. It's something that's remaining in the genome of the plant. Okay? Now today what happens is those fruits fall on the ground in enormous numbers. Coyotes come along and eat them. So this is coyote shit. And you see the little dots right here? Those are seeds from the poncha cactus. Here they are spread out on a piece of paper. And there's where they are in the center of the fruit. And humans have been eating these things for thousands of years. And in fact, there are indigenous groups in northern Mexico that moved in on this same food source. And the entire tribe or the entire village would do nothing but eat these fruits at a long, months-long period of the year. And everybody would go and shit in one big pit, so that the pit was full of an enormous number of these seeds. After a number of months of decomposition of the pit, it dries down in the dry season. They collect all the material out of the pit and winnow off the dust and the other trash and keep the seeds, and then grind the seeds up to make a flour out of it, as in wheat. Okay? Now this is another remnant, another anachronism. Today there's no animal out there who really does the dispersal of this cactus. But these cactus spines are very, very barbed inside of a sheath that prevents the wind abrasion from wearing off the barbs. So you hit this and the barbed spine sticks through the sheath into you, and you back away, and this entire green piece comes with. And because it's heavy, it swings on the spine, sticks more into you, and then you go off somewhere and disgustedly remove this thing, but you've now dispersed the cactus. So that almost has no fruit. It just vegetatively disperses with those barbed spines. Now, people object to horses today in wild areas all over the United States. They're viewed as vermin because, of course, they do all kinds of damage to whatever it was that somebody wanted, including turn all the mud holes into muddy, all the water holes into muddy things when they do what they're doing here. This is right near our house here. And especially in national parks where people want to see clear, pristine water with trout in it and things like that. But if you've got horses in there, which would have been there originally, those mud holes always would have been muddy. The problem with the horses, of course, is that when you introduce horses, you don't introduce the predators with them that used to keep their populations down. So either you have to chemically sterilize them or castrate them, as was the tradition for hundreds of years here. But the point is that horses are not really, they're a question mark because they are a native animal, but they do much damage to what our viewpoint of what society's viewpoint of what a pristine area should look like. Because we didn't bring in the cats, the things that these guys eat a zebra every night, and they have not been brought in and added to the mix, so they keep the horse population down. But interestingly enough, we get now onto a whole nother branch of inquiry. I'm sitting out there looking at these guys, the lions, and thinking about the big mammals and all that. And every morning about dawn in Kenya, in the Kenya, Nairobi National Park in Kenya, you hear tractors, front loaders, running frantically around on the paved roads in Nairobi National Park, just at dawn. Well, what's this for? So I get out there at dawn to see what's going on. What I discover is that every night, the predators are killing a moderately large number of big herbivores. And they leave the carcasses all over the place. Well, the tourist people don't want the tourists to meet the carcasses. So they send front loaders out every morning to collect the carcasses and take them away and dump them somewhere. So the park looks like all these things are just big friendly animals. And you get photographs of tourists sitting next to the lion, with their arm around the lion, all this kind of stuff. And that's the show for visitors. But it deceives you into forgetting that this is major carnivory and it's going on all the time. Well, that gets to a whole nother thing that's missing when we lost our big mammals here 9,000 years ago. Because we lost the predators, we lost the herbivores, but we also lost the carcasses. So here's the carcass. So I'm sitting there thinking about this and looking at this, and then here comes a stork. And the stork looks like it's being a carrion animal, a vulture, picking at the carcass. The vultures are sitting over here watching, they're already full. But it doesn't look right. So I crawl up to this guy and he lets me get right up next to him like I'm some other animal. And what I discover he's doing, he's not eating the carcass. He's picking flies. See the fly here and the fly here, the fly up there, another fly there. You're going to meet these flies later on. But he's picking these flies out of the carcass. So his food, that big animal right there, is little tiny insects, and which he's getting from this carcass. Now the vultures are also getting their food from this carcass. Now let's continue on this story. Of course, this guy is getting his food from that carcass, the hyenas. Now they also can kill big animals, but they also feed very heavily on the bigger herbivores left by. And incidentally, you see right here the grazing herbivores behind the hyena? They're not paying any attention to them at all. But if he turns around and walks to about there, all of a sudden the head goes up and they run away. That's that same distance, roughly, of throwing a spear. But this is a mongoose. It's sitting on Ken's shoulder in Kenya. And what these guys are specialized at doing is catching lizards, small snakes, small rodents, insects, and they're another piece of the carnivore community. Now, how does that relate to these carcasses? The same way that these do. Now, these are called jackals, but biologically, they're coyotes. In other words, we have a coyote in the New World, we have jackals in the Old World. They both do the same thing. They eat little things, insects, birds, lizards, snakes, that sort of stuff. Here's the New World carcass over here. But what that guy doesn't have to eat, and all these do have to eat, is this carcass in the dry season. Because you see, in the dry season, the sources of food, baby mice, young birds, insects, small snakes, all that kind of stuff are basically missing. So all those animals that eat the little guys also get lunch off the carcass, both by the meat itself and by getting the insects who are feeding on the carcass. So this is year-round food, which sustains year-round this guy and this guy and these guys. And that impacts very strongly the existence of little animals in Africa. So what happened to me was, as I'm plowing my way through all this, I started keeping a 3x5 card and making a note every time I saw a small lizard, small bird, a mouse, a big insect, and that kind of stuff that could be food for these things. This countryside is basically a desert. It has very, very few. Then I did the same thing in Costa Rica, where coyotes are. And this kind of food is everywhere. This place is crawling with snakes, lizards, mice, birds, and there's a few carnivores like this. But during the dry season, the 6-month dry season, there's almost none of this food. So you can't sustain animals like this, like that, like this. Okay. So basically what's happening here is that when you remove the big mammals, you removed a major source of food for a whole network of animals in Africa. And so where do you find, now Africa has a lot of species of snakes, a lot of species of mice, a lot of species of small birds. Where do you find them? You find them in the village. Because in the village, they're safe. The lions aren't in the village. So what happens is, you want to find lizards in Africa, you go right to a small village. You just sit on a bench somewhere and you just watch. They're all over the place. Snakes are all over the place. And the other side of the coin is that the snakes in Africa, almost all of them are venomous. Whereas the New World snakes have they have some very venomous snakes, but they're a very small number of species compared to the other species. So what happened here 9,000 years ago in the New World, when we lost our big mammals, was a catastrophic extinction of many other things. Dung beetles, the beetles who go and harvest dung off all those big herbivores, all gone. Well, not all gone, but the bulk gone. And all these, so this is a sort of a major ripple effect. And as we mentioned last time, a major keystone species effect as well, and very easy to see. But now let's go back a little further. Let's go back 270 million years ago. Now think about that for a moment. That is way before the dinosaurs. Okay, that's when dinosaurs were basically being invented. Okay, trees were being invented. And we had a tree that you all know. This is a ginkgo, on the roadside in downtown Philadelphia. And you can see the individual yellow fruits here on the ginkgo, which all fall on the sidewalk and look like this. There's the fruit the size of a small plum. There's a quarter for scale. And inside that fruit is this seed, which is relatively soft. You could crunch that up with your molars. So now, how do we have a big seed that's the size of a marble making it through a dispersal agent 270,000 years ago that was big enough to eat that fruit and disperse these seeds? Okay. There are fossil dinosaurs from Europe with their stomachs full of seeds. In other words, yeah, sure, we have Tyrannosaurus rex that ran around 8 other dinosaurs, but there were a lot of not only vegetation-eating dinosaurs, but fruit-eating dinosaurs, who then would have been the dispersal agent for those plants. So if we go back to this guy here, now today what happens is, who goes ahead and disperses these seeds? The only one that I can think of that will probably do it perhaps reliably at the present time would be pigeons. A pigeon can swallow a fruit that's this size here, and its gizzard or crop strip off the outer pulp, which is sweet and juicy and soft, and then regurgitate the seed. The seed would not go through the animal, but it might regurgitate it. So that's one possible dispersal agent for ginkgos, which are native to China at the present time. So in other words, the ones here in Philadelphia are introduced from China long time ago, I mean, some centuries ago. And they could, you know, in nature, they could be dispersed by a pigeon, but I'm not sure I can think of anything. I think a bear would crunch them up. A deer would definitely crunch them up. And so the existing mammals. But we didn't, you know, if we'd had these things here 9,000 years ago, our big herbivorous mammals that we lost, some of them would be able to swallow these without crunching up. But after thinking about that and getting to look back at this, I went and found a skull, a fossil skull, or the one on display, of a dinosaur like this guy, low down to the ground, the kind who would eat fruit. And went inside the mouth and looked at the molars. And very strikingly, the molars are not grinders. The molars are slicers. And this is an herbivore now. So this is kind of guy that's going to slice whatever he's eating. And you can see, you can put that soft fruit in there, and the shearing, slicing molars could easily go by and miss a large number of those seeds from the ginkgo fruit. It would obviously get some of them, but it's not like a horse molars or cow molars or things like that that are flat, or your molars for that matter, that are capable of grinding up something. Incidentally, I realized suddenly that I should say also that if you are walking down the street in Philadelphia and you happen to walk underneath a ginkgo tree that's dropping a lot of those fruits on the sidewalk, be aware that for some people, there are toxic oils in the surface of the fruit, which are like a mild case of poison ivy. You can pick up those fruits and handle a lot of them, and people like myself are not bothered. But Winnie, for example, the other side of this operation, is definitely sensitive to, to those. But she's also sensitive to the anacardic acid on mangoes as well. Mangoes are in the same family as poison ivy. And so she's sensitive to that too. So I want to be careful here about what I suggest, but I have seen people also on the street gathering large quantities of them in bags to take home, and I've asked, and they apparently they make jam or marmalade out of that fruit. So it means that some people are not bothered at all, by the toxic chemicals. Now, but we're back to the same old question that we asked earlier, and we'll ask again later on about fruit is, well, why does the outside of a fruit have toxic chemicals in it? I mean, fruit, quotes, wants to be eaten by a dispersal agent. Well, it wants to be eaten by a dispersal agent of some kinds and not other kinds. The classic example that you know, since I have a couple more minutes to mention to you, is red peppers, chilies. Chili peppers are repugnant to practically all mammals. Chili powder, or the compound is capsaicin, and that's a painfully burning chemical for practically all mammals. Birds cannot taste it. So that the red fruits of wild chili are little tiny bright red bird dispersed fruits with seeds inside of them. And birds can eat large quantities of those and then defecate the seeds later on. And that's how that gets around. So what the plant does not want is some rodent or some deer or some other animal like that to come along and eat pick all those little red fruits off the plant. So basically what they've done is select for a chemical which stops mammals. And so from a mammal standpoint, the chili pepper is a repellent. It's a protective agent. Protective not because the mammal will necessarily destroy the seeds, but the mammal won't shut the seeds in the right place. Whereas birds will put the seeds in whatever is the right place from the viewpoint of the plant itself. The other example related to that and related to this, the secondary compounds in the surface of this fruit is an orange. An orange has 450 odd different secondary compounds in the rind, in the outermost part of an orange, and that's what makes your lips burn when you bite into one. It's just one more case of protection of the orange against fungi and insects on the wrong animals. Okay, so we have hit the end here. That's my last slide. And what's the conservation message here is that when we talk blithely about extinction of this or that species, it's very common for people to say, oh, well, what's the difference if that species goes extinct? Well, what they don't understand is that that species is connected to many other species who are then in turn connected to many other species. And it's impossible to predict which of those things is going to drop out, that you are beginning to be very unhappy that it dropped out. So you're fiddling in the dark. If you start saying, well, who cares about this species of parrot or this species of anteater or this species of pangolin, each one of those guys are doing multiple things in a network in whatever system they still exist in. By taking that link or that piece, that module out of the network, it's like one of Paul Ehrlich's old analogies was you have an airplane and you take a rivet out, nothing happens. You take two rivets out, nothing happens. And all of a sudden, after you've taken 623 rivets out, the right wing falls off. Or you pulled out one more rivet and the propeller falls off. And you don't know beforehand because we're so totally ignorant of the biology of these organisms and what they do and how we relate to them, how we get things from them, how we're happy that they're there, just like how we're not happy when some other species are there. That's absolutely true. But the conservation message really is about extinction is that when you remove something, it's going to impact the biology of other things. Now that's unavoidable. We've already done a huge amount of extinction. People talk about the Anthropocene starting now. That's ridiculous. The Anthropocene started when we extinguished the big mammals 9,000 years ago, the megafauna. That's when the Anthropocene really began. but it's very fashionable to have it start just yesterday, or just start when your particular research project just got its first results. But the whole point is that we don't know what we're doing when we go in there and take a species out here, take a species out there, or let one disappear here, or let one disappear there. Okay, so I'll stop there. All right, thank you.